Good morning, everybody. I'm Ralph Dice, president of Dice & Company, and I'd like to welcome you to our Senior Executive Thought Leader Forum this morning. What a beautiful day in Cleveland, huh?
Yeah.
I picked up Susan Zach this morning and I sang her a few bars of What a Wonderful Morning. Or I'm sorry, What a Beautiful Morning. I can't even get the lyrics right. That's why I'm not a professional singer. And that and the lack of talent. We were talking, the day before any one of these, we always have a discussion about what's going on in town and how are we going to talk about our forum. And this is the week before the Republican National Convention here in Cleveland, which is really a wonderful thing for our city, yet we're all looking at it with trepidation, given what's going on in the world. So let's hope it's just as much a victory as the Cavs had a couple of weeks ago. I think that as you walk around downtown, if you've had a chance to do so on weekends, you'll be amazed at the young people who live downtown who are jogging, walking their dogs, going to the restaurants. This town is just so wonderful today. I wish I was 28 again. And having said that, when I was 30, I lived right next door at the Chesterfield, though I never stepped into the Union Club back then, except for a job interview. There wasn't any place you could eat downtown after 6 o'clock. So Kathy and I had to make sure that we had our groceries and that we had our menu prepared, because even the pewter mug stopped serving food, and it was right over here. The pewter mug right over here stopped serving food at 6 p.m. It still served alcohol for a few hours, but food, forget it. So for me, this is a magnificent time in Cleveland, and for those of us who are natives, we've gotten to see it happen. And one of the reasons that we have the thought leaders here at the Union Club is to get those of us who work in the outer suburbs downtown to get us to enjoy this wonderful facility, which many of you who grew up here know that there was a time when women could not even walk through the front door. And some of you may know that there's an African American who is the chair of the board of the Union Club. So much has changed in our lifetime here in Greater Cleveland, and I think we really need to be celebrating it and very happy and keep our fingers crossed that nothing crazy happens here next week. So I'm going to have Greg Reynolds make a few comments, and then we'll get on with Jackie. I'll introduce Jackie, and I'll start asking her some very penetrating questions. So Greg?
Thanks, Ralph. Well, I just want to call your attention to a sheet on your table about upcoming meetings. And we have some really exciting things going on to finish off the year and to start the new year. In September, Dr. Jay Gershon, who's the CEO of Neomed, will be joining us to talk about how he just really had a wonderful transformation of really what had been a one-building campus that I visited years ago into a vibrant partner with the community with state-of-the-art technology, a wellness center, living facilities, and we got to know Neomed. Susan Zach did a great search for them to find their VP of Advancement, who's with us this morning, Daniel Blaine. So, stand up there. Say again, Susan.
No, it was a position reporting to Daniel.
I'm sorry.
Daniel's the main.
She's
She's
doing
a great job.
So, I was trying to work in a shameless plug, so that's really why I did that. Thank you. I'm sorry. I met a high school student recently at a graduation party for my son-in-law's cousin, and she made a conscious decision to leave her friends at her high school and get into one of the high school programs there, and not just an alternative to college prep, but an actual, or to a in November, we have Kirsten Ellenborn, who is the CEO of the Science Center. She is passionate about STEM education, so passionate. There's a high school now, a STEM high school within the Science Center. And I had the pleasure of sitting across from her at a lunch with the CEO at the Political Leadership Center some months ago, and was really intrigued by her and her story. And so we invited her. And then not on your sheet, to kick off the year in January, we have our own Mark Goncia to talk about the deadly sins of employee termination. And I've asked Mark to just give you a couple of minute overview of what that's about.
Okay. Well, thank you, Greg. Counting the two meetings that we had yesterday morning and the one that I will have in Youngstown tomorrow morning, I've had the opportunity to sit in on 8,437 employee terminations. So that's more than the population of independents combined. And so we've seen it all. If there's a way to do an employee termination the wrong way, we've probably seen it. And that's some of the deadly, what we'll call the deadly sins. So our goal in shining a light on some of the wrong ways to do it is to help our colleagues and our friends to understand how important it is to plan separation the right way. And in fact, on the big day, to take advantage of wise counsel, which I've learned everything that I know from Ralph. He keeps telling me that. But we'll have a chance to go through some of the most typical deadly sins that we've seen doing it wrong, and hopefully that'll be an instructive meeting. I'm looking forward to how to help employees get through that tough situation with dignity, and how to help the employers do what they need to do from a business imperative of getting things properly.
Thanks, Mark. Patty Plato was good enough to invite Mark to speak at Riverside's annual HR Talent Summit in May, and I think she'll tell you that there was some humor and levity, along with some great educational points woven through that. So again, that will be on January 10th. So mark your calendars, and we'll hope to see you at all three events. Ralph?
Thank you, Greg. Could somebody get the maintenance man to just, I think the volume needs some work, I'm not sure. Whatever we can do. Does it sound okay to you? Okay, never mind, it's fine. It sounds weird to me, but I'm unused to hearing my voice being amplified. So if it sounds okay to you, that's all that matters. So Jackie Chisholm is the President and Chief Executive Officer, and I always have to read this because it's really kind of hard for me, the Council for Economic Opportunities in Greater Cleveland. And this is an agency that provides very important services, yet it's not an agency that's very well known except when it hits the front page of the Plain Dealer. Jackie has a really interesting career history. She started her professional career as a buyer for May Company. And eventually she got an undergraduate degree in medical anthropology. And how many knew that such a degree even existed? You know? Then she got her master's degree in psychological anthropology. And then she obtained a PhD in psychological anthropology. Jackie is a 3-case degree person. So apparently she doesn't like to move around a lot. She has a great story to tell. And I'm going to guide us through that story. So why don't we welcome Jackie? Let's give Jackie a warm welcome. So Jackie, tell us about your agency and what the role of your agency is.
First, if you don't mind, Ralph, I want to thank you all for this opportunity. I normally start my conversations with anyone in terms of relationship. I have a personal mission statement of open, honest, direct communication. Is everyone comfortable with that? Okay, perfect. And the reason I do that is because I find that too often people want to read between the lines, and there are no lines to read between. So what I'm going to say is exactly what I mean. So if you see me another day, it'll be the same information.
And we have a code of silence here.
Perfect. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about the Council for Economic Opportunities. We were created in 1964. in response to President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. So the Economic Opportunity Act created VISTA, Upward Bound, community action agencies, Head Start, and a number of other things. So they were supposed to be safety nets. So the goal was for people who were really experiencing difficulty, people in poverty, that these services were to help them move from poverty to self-sufficiency. So that's exactly why we were created, and that's exactly what we do now. We serve about 25,000 people per year. We are the largest community action agency in the state. We are the designated community action agency for Cuyahoga County, and every county in Ohio has a community action agency. I think when Ralph talked about this earlier, one of the things that was of interest to me in the agency is the fact that we are kind of the best kept secret in Cleveland. We do a lot of work, and given that poverty has increased, our services are needed more now than ever before. So I'm happy that I'm here, and thank you for the invitation.
Jackie, tell us how you recruited to the council.
So I told you I'd tell you the truth, so here's the truth. My husband and I were in Atlanta for a very short time. We moved back to Cleveland. And you need to know that one of the things that's very important to me is my faith, and I'm a Christian. So I went to church, and the woman said to me, a friend of mine who had just joined the church maybe a month before, she said, there's a perfect job for you. And I said, what? And she said, Council for Economic Opportunity. And I said, oh. Well, I used to be on the commission. In 2005, the Plain Dealer did a series of articles about my predecessors spending money in reckless ways. So she was using the credit card, now remember we're a poverty agency. She was using the credit card to buy Tiffany gifts and Coach bags and things like that. Look it up, it's in, do a Google search, which is what I did when she mentioned this job to me. So I looked in Google and thought, oh heck no, I'm not walking into that situation, who would do that. But then people kept talking to me about it. I mean, individuals, independent of each other. And so my youngest daughter said, under normal circumstances, Mom, with that many people talking to you, you would have said, God must want me to at least look at it. And she said, I don't understand why you have not applied that logic to this situation. And I thought, okay, all right, I will go ask God, because I didn't want to hear the answer. So I go to my prayer closet is my bathroom. So I go to the bathroom and I said, okay, God, look. I said, if you want me to apply, let me know, just confirm it. So I'm on my way to, maybe an hour later, I'm dropping my husband off, and I'm gonna go to Heinen's on Chagrin. And it popped into my head, well, you remember you needed paint. So Sherwin-Williams is across the street, so why don't you go there first and you can go. So I said, okay. So I go to Sherwin-Williams, I order my paint, I'm walking around to see if I need any brushes or anything like that, and I look down and there's a flyer that says, don't forget to register your child for Head Start. Now remember, I told you we're the largest Head Start agency in the state. I said, oh no. God wants me to apply for this position. So I called the headhunter, and I'd already told her no. I'm not interested, I don't think I'm a good fit, and so now I have to call her back and say, okay, go ahead and put my name in. The whole time praying, God, please don't make me do that job. Please don't make me do that job. You see what's going on there. I had 6 interviews for this position. I've never had 6 interviews for any professional position in my life. And the whole time I kept saying, please don't make me do this job. And it wasn't until interview number 5, right before that, that I said, okay, God, if this is your will for me, then it's what I want. And so I went through interview number 6, and they hired me. That's how I got there.
So when you arrived at the council, what did you find there?
Broken. Just broken. I mean, can you imagine? My predecessor is in prison now. She's serving 30 months. For taking bribes. So she didn't do anything inside the organization. Finances were fine. I kept hearing about that, and I asked that question before I got there, and show me your financials. But here's an agency that many people who work there are employees, either have family members or themselves at one point in their lives have used these services. We operate the Home Energy Assistance Program, HEAP. And so they're passionate about the work. But they had the main office, the leadership, doing things that embarrassed them. So at one point in time, they were very proud of the work that they were doing. At another point, they stopped telling people where they worked. Think about what happened with county council. So if you knew anybody or the county when all of that was happening, people who used to be very proud of their jobs now didn't want anybody to know that they worked for the county because they didn't want to be painted with the same brush. So the same thing was true here. So employees felt broken, they felt betrayed. Funders walked away. And if they didn't walk away, a lot of our partners walked away. Board members disappear. I mean, it was just amazing what we saw. But what was in place, and I think to me this is the most important thing, is I'm real clear, number one, why I'm there. And I said this to Greg and Ralph when we spoke, and Susan. I'm called to do the job. So I simply needed to know if people were still committed to the mission, because it's still important. So the rest of it we can fix, but I needed to know if there were enough people who were still committed to the job.
So how did you figure that out, Jackie?
I have interviewed over 250 people. We have about 465 employees. We're a $40 million operation, and most people aren't aware of that. So we're not a little nonprofit. So I just kept talking to people. I talked to some of the funders, our former funders. I talked to former employees. I talked to employees, that leadership the first week. I just met with them, talked to me about the agency. And as an anthropologist, I'm assessing culture the entire time, wherever I am. And what I heard very clearly was, great place, wonderful work, we've been betrayed, lack of trust, please help us get this ship right. That was it. Very clear.
So what steps did you take to right the ship?
The first thing, I had 8 direct reports, 8 vice presidents. Why? I don't know. So I said this to Greg this morning. When you think about what a conductor does in an orchestra, so imagine that all of the people who are playing the instruments are in one little group. And so the first thing I had to do was to say, okay, all the woodwind instruments move over here. All the percussion instruments move over here. All of the string instruments move over here. So I created 6 divisions. So we now have executive, operations, marketing and communications, development, external relations, and I'm forgetting and operations. So I had to create 6 different divisions, and out of those 6 divisions, I've created 6 vice presidencies. So instead of 8 people who were doing kind of their own thing, now it's a very clear line of responsibility. I can't hold you responsible, or accountable rather, if you don't know what you're responsible for. And that was part of the problem. So we had people kind of doing things. And so now everyone understands exactly their role. We had to reorganize, the chart and everything, and communicate that to people and explain to them why it was necessary. And I think too often when you come in to change things, you really do have to spend time assessing what's already there and what is working and who are the influencers. We all talk about that. Who are the influencers? Where did this come from? Because if you don't understand their culture and their history, when you start making changes, if you're not really clear and careful about it, you're going to have that pushback. But the other thing that I recognized walking in the door is that we had a very short window to change everything. The infrastructure that wasn't in place, so I had to shake up all of that ground intentionally. Shake up the ground, make it look different, and then create that structure, put it in. And what I've said to people, I like analogies, by the way. I had to lift up this house, put that foundation back in it, and then bring the house back down before anyone who would be resistant figured out where the ground was. I had to shake it up so that they wouldn't be comfortable. And so we're now in another position, or another phase in the agency where we have to shake the ground up again. Because now people who don't like the changes, don't want the changes, were considered influencers in the old culture, they're starting to reassert themselves. So now we have to shake the ground up again.
So how will you do that? What are you thinking of doing to shake the ground a second time?
Okay. Well, fortunately, something happened that makes it easier for me. We're going to move. So we're currently in the Halley building. Now you know what's going to happen next week, right? And it's in, pardon me, that's in Halley building. But our lease is up in about 2 months. And so we're going to have to move as an agency. So when we move, we're going to move offices, we're going to move, so to a certain degree that helped. The other way that we needed to do it is to relaunch the brand. So we have a new slogan. So our mission statement has to stay intact. The state government requires certain words have to be in it, moving from poverty to self-sufficiency. That's required. But the slogan is investing in people, nurturing their success, transforming lives every day. So we now have a new website. We have an intranet. Employees were getting their news from the newspaper, not from the agency. So we changed that. We spend a lot of time in doing professional development. I have an entirely new team of people. And so all of us are really working together as a team and making sure that we're on the same page. Those people who need to be promoted, who are we talked about this earlier, first adopters, those are the ones who are now in leadership positions because those are the ones that we need to help drive the change. The ones who are resistant, they get to choose. Either we will help them choose or they will choose for themselves. So we've already reorganized some people out of positions because they were toxic to the agency. You know, long before I got there, when you talk to enough people and they say, well, that one and that one and that one, you go, okay, so that one and that one have to leave. So we made some changes within the first 4 weeks. And as soon as that happened, and these were people who were considered sacred cows, untouchables. And as soon as we touched them, then everyone else said, oh my God, they're serious.
Now, one of the things you pointed out was that the agency had lost its funders. How did you bring the funders back?
We're still working through that.
Are you?
We are, 98% of our funding is either federal or state. And the Head Start program is about 75% of the budget. So we didn't lose that funding. We lost a portion of that funding. I think the best thing that you can ever do when these kinds of things happen is trust has been broken. And that's what funders feel. When negative things happen, negative stories, they feel as if, you know, you've done something to betray their trust. And the only way you can rebuild trust is to be consistent in your communication, be transparent in everything that you do, and consistent in your behavior. So I met with all of our funders, either the ones we currently have or the ones that we used to have. And I said to them, this is my vision for the agency, this is how I operate. I started my conversation with them the way I started with you, open, honest, direct communication. Are you comfortable with that? And that had not been part of their communication with the agency for a while. We disappeared. So when all those things started happening in the newspaper, the leadership stopped going to meetings. We weren't at tables. You know, and many people didn't want us at the table because they didn't want to get painted with that brush. So what we said is we're open for business. And then how can we partner with you? And what can we do? These are the resources we have. How can we help you do whatever it is that you're trying to do? But the bottom line for me always is there's a population out there, they're hurting. And so whatever resources that we have, we need to make certain that we're using them to the best of our ability, that we're good stewards of the funding, and I get it. You know, we had talked about this, Ralph, that I come from a place of business and being able to talk. You have to navigate between these two worlds, social service and business. We need to make an economic conversation about the work that we do so people understand that it's not just good work. It's not just the nice thing to do, but there's a reason that we do it, and people are affected, and the economy is impacted as a result. When we move somebody from poverty to self-sufficiency, you know, to a job, they're paying taxes, there's an economic reason for what we do. And we have to make a case for that, so we're in the process of doing that now.
As I'm sitting here listening to you, Jackie, it occurs to me that you're a very focused, strong CEO, yet most of your career you haven't been a CEO. Yeah. So this is really, you're in a startup museum situation, but this is really your first role as a CEO of an established organization.
Correct.
So what is it, I mean, you come across as someone, you've been in this role for about a year. Mm-hmm. So you come across as someone who's been in this role for considerably longer. So what is it about your personal development that allows you to be so self-assured and what's really a new experience for you?
Number one, I pray a lot, to be honest, especially during this period of time. I said earlier, since I've been in this role, I think every month I've quit in my head.
Every month?
Every month I've quit in my head. Because there's so many things that you don't anticipate. I would say that the reason that I come across as self-assured is I know my skill set, and I'm very clear about my skill set. I am a transformer. My job is to walk into situations that are difficult, where there's chaos, and to bring order to chaos. That's what I do. I do it well. I'm very clear, and I told the board that when I interviewed, that you want someone like me at the table trying to fix this for you. Now, once it's fixed, I don't need to be there. My job is to fix it. I always say this, I take like a Rubik's Cube. My job is to get it, do like this, and hand it back to you. Now, if you don't give me another one to play with, it's time to go. And so as a result of that, there's not a day that I don't know the reason that I'm there is because this is an agency that is important to the community. But it has fallen on difficult times, and you need a person like me, and I'm not saying that I'm the only one, but I know that this is what I do, and I do it well. So I'm not confident as a CEO. I'm still learning how to do that part of it, but I'm very confident about, I look at it and I say, okay, that should go over here, that should go over there, and ask the question, I'm sorry, why do we do it that way? You know, and I gotta digress. One of the first conversations I had with staff was the monkey conversation. You've heard about the experimental monkey. You remember that, where the researchers brought a monkey into a room and they had wired this pole with bananas. Do you remember that story? For those
Well,
who
you're going to have
okay.
to tell us.
All right. So they wired this pole with bananas, and they had monkeys that were hungry. So they brought the first monkey in, and it started running up the pole, and they shocked it before it got to the bananas. So it came down. And so it kept running toward this pole because it was hungry, and they kept shocking it. And so eventually that monkey learned, don't go up this pole. So then they brought another monkey in, and so the second monkey starts running toward the bananas, and the first monkey pulls him down. And it kept running, and it pulls him down. And so the first monkey eventually taught the second monkey, don't go up there. So then they pull the first monkey out, they bring in the third monkey, the second one teaches the third one, don't go up there. Now the only one that knew why you're not supposed to go is the first monkey, but the second one taught the third one taught the fourth one, okay. And so I told that story to our staff during our staff day, and I said to them, my job is to figure out what are the monkeys.
Yeah.
And so if you say to me, if I ask the question, why do we do that? And your answer is, because we've always done it that way, it's a monkey. So someone has to explain to me the rationale for doing that, and if you can't explain that to me, then that way of doing business is subject to change. Because we are at a point, especially in our history in 2016, that we can't continue doing it the way we've always done it. World is moving. The infrastructure that we had, especially IT, was circa 1990. And every time, I swear to you, if I had hair, it would have fallen out. You just look at some of what we do and how we've been doing it, and we've been doing that way. God bless the people who've been doing the job. We have made them do it twice as hard because no one was thinking about it. And I think a part of that is the history of community action agencies, and especially Health and Human Services. People really care about people. That's why they do it. They're passionate about helping people. But they didn't always have a person at the helm who said, okay, how do we do it better? What are the efficiencies that we can create? What's the technology that we need to have? Someone said this to me recently. I'm not as much interested in best practices, I'm interested in next practices. When I leave this institution, my vision, and I've said this to everyone, I want not only the feds to tell everyone, you need to go to Cleveland to see how they do it there. I want everyone flying into Cleveland to say, how did they do it there? I want us to be one of the premier institutions, and I say that to our staff all the time. No excuses. You are professionals. We haven't treated them like professionals.
Remind us what the slogan is again.
Sure. Investing in people, nurturing their success, transforming lives every day.
How did you develop that slogan?
Well, to be honest with you, I was at home. I just thought about, what do we do? What is it that we do, and how do we explain that to people in a snapshot? Mission statements, our mission statement is 3 lines long. I can't quote it to you at this point. Yeah. But I can remember that we invest in people. And I mean that not only for the customers that we have, but for our employees. We have to invest in them. We nurture their success. That's what we're supposed to do. And in doing that, we transform lives every day. So it was really, I was at home and saying, what do we do? That's what we do.
Shifting the conversation just a bit, how does a CEO like you interact with your board? What are the issues around interacting with the board? Give us a sense of that, because those of us who don't have a board probably don't have an appreciation for the dynamics of board relationships, and I think that would be something we'd all be interested in hearing about.
What was interesting to me when I first arrived, I remember, and I have to digress, 2 years ago I said, I do not want to be another vice president. I want to be a president. Because vice presidents, you are responsible for your part, But a president is responsible for everything. So I was like, I'm ready to do this, without the understanding is that you report to a board. So
Oh, wait, without the understanding.
without the full
that you-
understanding that you
Okay.
report. Now, I saw.
I just wanted to clarify that I heard that.
Yeah, I saw my previous bosses work with their board, and I've seen some wonderful relationships. There are others that I've seen stressed to the max. And part of me was like, well, isn't that great? I don't have to do that. So then I started working with the board. I think the challenge for me with the board is that I have 15 bosses.
Oh, and let me just stop you for a second. Who was the chair of your board?
George Forbes.
Can you imagine having George Forbes as the chair of your board?
And he quit 3 weeks after I arrived. So the board is in transition. We had a number of people come on the board in a very short time. And so the board is trying to gel. And then you've got old guard, new guard when that happens. I mean, so all of that's being played out. So the agency is in transition, the board is in transition, and my job is to, and I've had to learn this, to be honest with you, there's some things that I can do that I can help influence the process, but there are certain things that only the board can do. So I can point things out to them, but the reality is they have to manage themselves. We're at a point because of what happened with Mrs. Middleton, Jackie Middleton. And can you imagine when they interviewed me as Jackie Middleton, Jackie Chisholm? I almost didn't get the job because my name was Jackie. Yeah, they told me that. And so I've had to remind people that my name is Jackie, but I'm not that Jackie. Okay? God bless her.
You could have changed it to Roberta.
God bless her. If nothing else, I'm very consistently me. And so I told them who I was, and I keep reminding them, I told you who I was, and you hired me anyway. So don't be surprised. Don't be surprised when I tell you that this is what I'm going to do, and then you give me permission to do it, and then all of a sudden you wonder why I did it, because I told you I was going to do it. And I think that's been the challenge for the agency. Nonprofits, sometimes you have so many layers, and because you have a volunteer board, and people have strong opinions, and you have to work through all of those things. And so, again, one of my skill sets is I try my best to always establish at the outset an honest dialogue. I really try not to create a situation where we can't talk to each other and put all of our cards on the table. And so if I do that, then I expect that in return. And I tell people that. I expect it in return. So if I tell you that open, honest, direct communication, I'm a big girl. Talk to me. And I'm going to do the same for you. So I've had to navigate around people who remember the agency when. They remember 1965 and 1966, but we're in 2016. That's difficult. Then I've got other people who are running to the future, and that's difficult because there are all these other people that you have to navigate. So sometimes I'm in the middle of this pull between the two. It's challenging.
So are you dividing and conquering with the board, or are you identifying people that you need to sit down with and twist their arms, and other people where you can just give them some sugar? I mean, how are you doing that?
How do I do this? There are some people on the board that I ask to be on the board. So those are my supporters. And so I sit down with them and I make sure that they understand exactly what's going on. There are other people that I knew.
And let me just ask,
Sure.
how are members appointed to that board?
There are 3 sectors by our bylaws and the state requires. So we have to have low income, 1/3 has to be low income. The board minimum is 15. 1/3 low income, 1/3 public sector, and 1/3 private sector. Public sector has to be a currently elected official or the representative of a currently elected official. Okay. So as long as you're in one of those sectors, then there's a nominating committee and they go through the process and then the board chooses.
Okay, so how do you manage? So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You have 3 separate categories of board members,
Correct.
basically. Do they behave differently?
Absolutely.
Well, tell us a little bit about that.
All right, so for low income, the low income we have through Head Start, we have to have a policy council. And the policy council is comprised of all parents who have children in Head Start. So we operate 15 sites now. So every site has its own policy council. And from each one of the policy councils, they elect a person to represent them on the larger council. So the president of that council is always a board member. they become a board member. There's a seat for them. So we have approximately 3 former policy council presidents on our board. Okay, so for them, the conversation is making certain that the children in the Head Start program are taken care of, making certain that we're doing what we say we're supposed to do, that the program runs well, that we're using the finances well. That's their issue. For the public sector, you know, Cleveland is a political place. You know, we always talk about the fact that it's not politics with a little p, it's politics with a big P. All right, so you already heard that George Forbes was the chair at one point in time. So prior to that, we've had a number of other people who are chairs who are politicians. And they bring that with them. So the upside to that is if they have gravitas in the community, there are certain things that we can get done. The downside to that is whatever their agenda may be, if it's not in the best interest of the agency and it's their agenda, then all of that gets painted on the agency. So you have to really understand kind of their motivation for being there. So I spend time talking to people, you know, help me understand what it is that's interesting to you. So I met with all of the board members individually shortly after I arrived, just to find out who they are, help them understand who I am, what I'm going to do in my perspective. For private sector, they're there because for the most part, they really care about this issue. And so you'll find that many of our members, our board members, who are in private sector, have their own businesses, they've been doing this kind of work for years. So this is not a new thing for them. It's something they're passionate about.
So with the folks that you're bringing in from the your facilities, the policy chairs, they typically have, I would suggest they have less experience with board participation. So how do you train them to be effective board members?
Well, we actually have training, a board training.
Do you?
But along the way, policy council members, we do leadership training throughout their process.
I see.
Yeah. So by the time they get to the board, they have already, you know, run meetings themselves, you know, Robert's Rules of Order and that kind of thing. They get a little intimidated because they're in a room with, you know, politicians, you know, business owners, and if anything, you have to help them understand you're a board member. Your vote is as important as their vote.
Yes.
And once they're on the board for a while, then they get it, you know.
Yeah. So you get to see a transformation.
Oh,
in those
absolutely.
folks.
Absolutely.
You spent 17 years in higher education.
I did.
What is higher education like in terms of what you're experiencing as CEO of a nonprofit agency? Are there specific learnings that you've been able to transfer? Are there things that are totally different in higher ed that don't apply? You know, what can you share with us about that? Because most of us are not in haven't been in higher ed since we graduated. So we're always curious about that.
Higher ed is a very interesting thing because higher ed, and I think a lot of people don't have this appreciation. So in higher education, you have operations and then you have the academics. Think about it in terms of theater. So you have the people who actually operate the theater, but then you have the actors and the players and things like that, okay? And they don't talk the same language. They really don't speak the same language. And the same thing is true in higher ed. So you had the administrators and then you had the faculty. And I remember one day in particular where I was I was out in a meeting and the operations people were sitting there and a faculty member stood up and said, well, don't they know that if it doesn't work for the faculty, it doesn't matter? And we're, you know, operations people are saying, so I guess we're just chopped liver. We don't really matter in this situation. And so you live in higher ed in between that dichotomy. So then when I received the PhD, I hadn't gotten the degree yet. I had just passed the orals, right? So I wasn't going to get the actual degree for several weeks. The next day after I passed my orals, I was invited to participate on a dean search. Now, I had worked at the place for 10 years, and no one had ever invited me to participate on a dean search. And I remember thinking, did I change my deodorant? Did something happen? All of a sudden, it was as if someone, you know, looked at me and said, how long have you been standing there? And it was simply because of those 3 little letters. You know, and at first I was really upset about that. I said, it's so unfair. It's just not right. And then I had to recognize that, no, it's not right. It is what it is. It's culture. And thank God I have it. You know, so I now have a membership card. Now, in terms of CEOGC and the work that we do, I think what is similar is the understanding that the people who are in the field, who are working with our clients, are the people who really are the artists. They're the ones who are really doing the work. The operations people, if we're not clear about the important role that we play in supporting them, and that's part of the conversation that I've been having with everyone. Everyone plays a part in this. My job is to help everyone understand that the part that they play is equally important as the part that someone else plays. And I think that's the challenge, because too often we silo people. Agencies are really good at doing that. And so what we want to do is break down the silo. I want one conversation. We're in one house. And when you walk into our house, there's a room called Head Start. There's a room called Community Services. There's a room called HEAP, but the same house. We built 3 different houses, 3 different blueprints. And so now we have to change all of that.
Isn't she amazing? The analogies, the stories. I'd like to open up the room for questions. So please, anybody, throw a question out at Jackie.
Should be softball.
Jackie, maybe I think the story you told me would illustrate the dynamics you were going through with it, without naming the actual person or position, that lean-in moment.
Oh yeah. I had been at the job for 2 weeks, and many of our employees or senior people talked about this one individual, very strong-willed, and literally the first time we met, she leaned in and started telling me about her degrees, and literally leaned in. And so I leaned in too. And then I heard in the back of my head, God said, you don't have to do that. So I sat back and folded my legs, and I said, you know what? I said, I've talked to all of the senior leaders. I said, and the decision is simple. Who's a keeper? Who's not a keeper? And who's a keeper that needs mentoring or training? Her response, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. And that was, for me, an important moment. That person has since left our institution. Because what happened in the agency when all of those things were swirling around, there were pockets of power that were created. So those who were aggressive, assertive, and unfortunately the leadership ceded power. And so when I got there, I saw all of this, and we broke all of that up. And that was the last one to disappear because they had a connection to a board member. And I had to explain to that person, you don't report to the board, you report to me. Let's be clear. So it's been interesting. I've learned a great deal. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about how your anthropological lens has helped guide you through all of this? Because it seems that that description that you just gave is one terrific example of how it's helped you.
Yeah.
Every place I go, for example, this organization, this setting, this is a culture. There's a way that you all interact with each other, especially if you've been doing this for a while. There's a language that you speak here that you don't speak other places. So when I arrived at CEOGC, the question was, what's the language? How do people view their environment here? How are they defining it? And what's always interesting to me is the way people often define it. When you look at the structures that support it, they're not usually the same. And they're not aware of that. That's why you have a lot of friction. Because you say, well, that's what they said, but the reality is that's not the way they operate. So it took a while to figure out, especially from senior leadership, what's the culture that's communicated here? So even though people didn't say they were broken, you could hear it in their conversation they were broken. The agency was broken. You could tell just by the infrastructure, or the lack thereof, that we needed to shore that up, while we also had conversations with people about their value, because people had not been celebrated. So I remember, and I have to digress, I had a story once with the former president of Case Western Reserve. His name is Dr. Acton Harpett, and unfortunately he died about a year ago. Great man, great leader. And we were trying to put together a community program. And I needed him to come and talk to some of our employees. And I said, you know what, if you would just say what a great job they're doing, I said, that would just speak volumes to them. And he said, I never thought to do that. He said, because he had been taught that if you just do your job, isn't that what you're paid to do? Why would I need to celebrate you for doing your job? And it was one of those moments of, oh, okay. I said, well, let me explain to you that people, when you value the work, if you value them and you acknowledge the work, they'll do that much more because they feel someone values them. And so he said, oh, let me think about that for a minute. So I remember that conversation. So when I got to this place, I always catch people doing good stuff. Okay? I really try not to focus on the negative. That's going to take care of itself usually. Now, if I have to address it, great. And I've already said this to all of our senior leaders. I hold you responsible and accountable. I'm not going to go to your person who didn't do it. I'm coming straight to you because it's your responsibility to make sure, just like I hold myself accountable. So I'm not asking you to do anything I won't do. So when I get to this environment, that's what I started doing. I started asking questions, and I started paying attention. And I'm looking at the infrastructure, and I'm saying, okay, here's the things that I need to fix. But again, I think, Howard, part of it is because I'm clear about my job is to right this ship, that as an anthropologist, it helps. I don't know if once we get it straightened out, that my skill set then will be very useful in this area, because I need to find something else, a new culture, a new thing that we need to do. Exactly, the Rubik's Cube, you know. And I think people, I would say it this way, people are often surprised that I pay attention. So I pay attention to how someone walks, I pay attention to how they talk, I pay attention to their nonverbal cues, so that when something changes, I note that, and I'll say, how are you today? And they'll say, I'm fine, and I'll say, no, you're not. And the reason I know you're not is because I noticed that your tone is different, or I noticed that you're walking differently, or I noticed that, and they're surprised by that. And what that communicates to them is I'm paying attention. I care about you, and this is something that, and I'm sorry I didn't bring some materials today, but one of our new brochures say, we see you. And I think that's all people want. As an anthropologist, I see you. I see you in who you are. I'm not trying to make you into someone you're not, but I see you. And if we do this the right way with this new culture in the agency, they will remind themselves as to why they do this in the first place. I think people forget. They've forgotten because of all the other stuff that was happening. Why did you come in the first place? And if this is just a job for you, and it can be a job, and that's okay, we all have bills to pay. But if this is not the thing that you want to do, let's help you get to where you want to go. Because if I develop you as a person, as a professional, I'm going to get the best from you. The agency will get the best from you. And then you can go someplace else. That's what other people did for me. Did I answer your question, Howard?
Okay. Yeah, I think she did. One last question? Susan, please.
It can be lonely at the top, I would think. And I'm just curious if you have any kind of informal group of support with other leaders in the nonprofit community that you've reached out to?
Oh my God, yes, absolutely. Another story. Years ago when I worked a case, I was working in Little Italy. Now, as you probably know, Little Italy is not that welcoming, or was not that welcoming of people of color. And I was sitting on the Alter House board. And I was always, the only person in the room. And I remember one day my husband said to me, he said, aren't you afraid? I said, oh no, there are people who care about me and I'll be fine. So I walk in the room and the guy says, I would not leave the room without me walking you to your car. And I thought, oh my God. I said, really? He said, yes, still like that here. Oh shoot. So he says to me, there was a story that someone told him about Bishop Pillar years ago. So when he became bishop, someone said to him, you will now never get a bad meal. You will never have a bad hotel room, and you will never get the truth told to you. And so I remember that. So as a leader, when you ask the question about kind of working with other people, I'm mindful of the fact, as they say, it's lonely at the top. So it's really, it's talking to people who've been where you are, who can help you through it. So I've already reached out, but I've always done that. Whatever position I've been in, I've had at least 3 or 4 mentors, whether they were formal or informal. I make it my business to have a network. So yes, I do that now. But I'm also mindful of the fact, and I tell that story because I think it's also important not to stay at that level. So I spend time talking to our employees. I walk around, I believe in management by walking around. They need to see you. And especially given what's happened with our agency and the fact that no one saw my predecessor or the leadership at all. So when we started going to different sites, people, and they could talk to me. They were told that they couldn't speak to this other lady. So I say, hi, how are you doing? I give hugs. I'm asking about everybody. I let them know I see you. So for you, the answer to your question is, I do this all the time. I just need to define the right, and you have to be careful about the who you're asking. So it's not just anybody that I ask. I find leaders who are similar to me, who have a moral compass like mine. I'm here because I'm called to do it. I'm here because they need my help. And so I find people who are just like that. And you'd be surprised how many people who, once you're real clear about who you are, you kind of attract people like yourself. And so people have reached out to me and said, I'm here if you need me. And so I'm very judicious about the how and the who I have conversations with.
I know that Jackie could actually talk for probably another hour. And I could sit and listen to her for another hour, but our time is up here. And I must say, Jackie, that in terms of leadership, yours has been one of the best leadership talks I've ever heard. And I really thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for the invitation.
See you in September. Will you still love us in September?
Thank you, Ralph.